The shuddering of the ship had become unbearable in the last 12 minutes. Kai gripped the control yoke with white knuckles, sweat beading on his forehead as warning lights flashed across every panel in the cockpit of the Nomad. The electromagnetic storm had appeared out of nowhere, catching him completely off guard as he'd skimmed the outer atmosphere of Xylos to scan for salvageable debris. "Come on, girl, hold together," he muttered through clenched teeth as another violent jolt rocked the ship. The primary engine had already failed, and the auxiliary power was fluctuating dangerously. The Nomad was a sturdy vessel. It had to be in Kai's line of work, but it wasn't built to withstand this kind of punishment. Through the viewport, the swirling storms of Xylos's upper atmosphere grew closer. Beautiful, deadly, and completely unexplored. Kai had heard rumors about this planet from other salvagers, whispers of strange signals and ancient technology, but also warnings about ships that never returned. He'd planned to stay in high orbit, just close enough to scan for valuable materials, not crash land on the dam's surface. The proximity alarm screamed as the ship continued its uncontrolled descent. Kai scrambled to reroute power, diverting everything to the emergency thrusters and heat shields. If he could just stabilize enough to... A sickening crunch of metal tore through the cockpit as something massive clipped the ship's port side. The Nomad spun wildly, and Kai's head slammed against the control panel. Stars exploded behind his eyes as the ship plummeted through layers of atmosphere, trailing smoke and debris. The last thing Kai saw before blackness claimed him was the canopy of an alien forest rushing up to meet him. Massive trees with luminescent fronds and trunks as wide as buildings. Pain was the first sensation that greeted Kai when consciousness returned, a throbbing headache and sharp stabs from his ribs with each breath. The second was the acrid smell of burned circuitry and fuel. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, and found himself slumped against the shattered remains of his pilot's chair. The cockpit was a ruin of twisted metal and broken glass. Weak sunlight, filtered through what he assumed was Xylos's dense atmosphere, streamed through a jagged tear in the hull. With a groan, Kai unclasped his harness and immediately regretted it as he slumped forward. He caught himself against the edge of the control panel, breathing heavily through the pain. A quick self-assessment, possible concussion, bruised, maybe cracked, ribs, cuts and contusions, but nothing immediately life-threatening. He'd gotten lucky. The Nomad hadn't. It took nearly 15 minutes to force open the emergency hatch and climb down to the forest floor. The ship had carved a path of destruction through the canopy before embedding itself in the soft earth. Looking back at his vessel, Kai felt his stomach sink. The hull was breached in multiple places, the port engine had been completely sheared off, and the navigation array was a melted mess of components. The Nomad wouldn't fly again. At least not without a proper repair facility and parts he simply didn't have. Xylos spread out before him in all its alien majesty. Trees rose hundreds of meters into the sky, their trunks wider than pre-space age buildings, with undulating branches that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Smaller plants carpeted the ground with vibrant colors that shifted subtly, reacting to his movements or perhaps the air currents created by his passage. The air smelled sweet, almost cloying, with undertones of ozone and something else he couldn't identify. Kai retrieved his emergency survival pack and what little salvageable equipment remained. His handheld scanner was damaged but still partly functional, showing basic atmospheric readings. The air was breathable but high in oxygen and trace elements he'd never seen before. His communications array was dead, the long-range beacon smashed beyond repair. Focus on priorities, he muttered to himself, organizing his thoughts. Water, shelter, food, signal. Standard survival protocol. He secured his service pistol in its holster and strapped a utility knife to his thigh. The forest seemed peaceful enough, but experience had taught him that the most beautiful environments often harbored the deadliest predators. Strange sounds echoed through the forest, whistling calls that seemed to answer one another, and low, rhythmic rumbles that might have been wind or something larger moving in the distance. The foliage rustled unnaturally in places where no breeze touched it, and more than once Kai caught glimpses of fleeting movements at the corner of his vision. He'd been searching for a water source for nearly an hour when it happened. The scanner had picked up liquid readings about half a kilometer east of the crash site. As Kai pushed through a thicket of vine-like growths with phosphorescent thorns, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Instinct made him drop to a crouch, just as something whistled through the air where his head had been moments before. Kai rolled, drawing his pistol in one fluid motion, and found himself staring up at a figure poised on a low-hanging branch. The creature was humanoid, but undeniably alien. Lithe and powerful, with a graceful, predatory stance that reminded him of the jungle cats from Earth's history archives. Its skin was a mosaic of soft scales and patterns of deep purple and blue that caught the light when it moved. Slitted, amber eyes regarded him with unmistakable intelligence and hostility, framed by a mane of what looked like feathered tendrils. A long, sinuous tail lashed behind it, maintaining perfect balance on the narrow perch. Kai somehow knew instinctively, held a spear crafted for what appeared to be bone and stone, its tip aimed directly at his chest. Her clothing was minimal but functional, made from woven fibers and what looked like tan hide. "I'm not a threat," Kai said slowly, keeping his weapon lowered but ready. "My ship crashed. I'm just trying to survive." The alien made no indication that she understood his words, but her eyes narrowed slightly, tracking his every movement. She was a hunter, that much was clear, and right now, Kai felt uncomfortably like prey. A sudden tremor shook the ground, accompanied by a distant crashing sound, likely some delayed impact from a ship's debris. The alien's attention shifted slightly, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. A massive section of one of the phosphorescent vines, destabilized by the tremor, broke free and swung down toward them both. Kai shouted a warning, but it came too late. The alien leapt with incredible agility, but one of the barbed thorns, as long as Kai's forearm, caught her across the shoulder and side as she twisted in midair. She landed on her feet with the grace of a cat, but immediately staggered, a low hiss escaping between sharp teeth. The thorn had left a vicious gash across her shoulder, and an alarming discoloration was already spreading from the wound. Whatever toxin the plant contained, it was acting fast. The alien warrior stumbled, her spear lowering as she struggled to maintain her footing. Kai hesitated only for a moment. He could leave her. It would certainly be the safer option, but something in him rebelled against the thought. He holstered his pistol and raised his hands, approaching cautiously. The warrior snarled, raising her spear with visible effort. Her breathing had become labored, but the determination in those amber eyes hadn't diminished. "I can help," Kai said, pointing to his medkit and then to her wound. "That thorn was poisonous. Let me treat it." She bared her teeth, backing away, but then swayed dangerously. The spear tip wavered as her strength failed. Her eyes darted from Kai to the wound and back, calculation and desperation warring in her expression. Finally, she spoke, her voice a musical growl with consonants that seemed to vibrate at odd frequencies. "If you keep looking, I'll pounce. Now hurry and get the thorn out." Kai blinked in surprise. She spoke a rough approximation of standard trade language, the simplified communication protocol used across known space for basic interactions. How a native of an unexplored world knew it was a mystery for another time. He approached carefully, retrieving his medkit. The warrior lowered her spear but kept it within reach, her eyes never leaving him. Up close, the wound looked worse. Angry purple streaks spreading from the gash, the scales around it turning a sickly gray. "This will hurt," Kai warned, withdrawing a pair of forceps and antiseptic. "The bar might still be in there." She didn't respond except to tense as he examined the wound. Working quickly, Kai located a fragment of the thorn embedded in her shoulder and extracted it with the forceps. The alien remained silent throughout, though her tail lashed violently when he had to probe deeper. The thorn fragment was unlike anything he'd seen, crystalline and seemingly active even after removal, pulsing with an internal glow. Kai applied a broad-spectrum anti-venom from his kit, hoping it would help against the unknown toxin. He followed with antiseptic and a pressure bandage. Throughout the procedure, they maintained a wary silence, two predators in an uneasy truce. That should slow the poison, Kai said when he finished. But I don't know what that plant is or what its toxin does. We need to find shelter where you can rest. The alien studied him, her head tilted slightly. Why help? She finally asked, the words precise but halting. Kai shrugged. Because you'd be dead otherwise. And I'm guessing you know this planet a lot better than I do. Seems like a fair trade. My medical supplies for your knowledge. She considered this, then gave a short nod. Lyra, she said, touching her chest. Your name? Kai asked, and she nodded again. I'm Kai. Kai, she repeated, the name sounding different in her vocal register. Follow. Not safe here. Shadow stalkers hunt at light change. She rose with visible effort, using her spear as support. Kai gathered his supplies and followed as she led him through the undergrowth with remarkable stealth despite her injury. She moved like water between the massive tree trunks, occasionally stopping to listen or scent the air. Communication was limited but functional. Lyra knew enough trade language for basic concepts, though complex ideas required gestures and improvisation. Kai's partially functioning scanner helped bridge some gaps, displaying images for concepts he couldn't convey. She showed him which plants to avoid, particularly the crystal thorns that had wounded her, which she called death sleep vines, and which fungi were safe to touch. Twice she froze, pulling Kai into cover as strange creatures passed nearby. Once a swarm of hovering orbs that pulsed with internal light, and later something massive that moved through the underbrush with surprising silence for its size, leaving only the barest impression of iridescent scales and multiple limbs. Your ship, Lyra said as they paused by a small stream with water that tested safe on Kai's scanner. Others will come. Kai shook his head grimly. Not unless I can repair the communication array. I was on a solo salvage run, off the regular routes. Nobody knows I'm here. She seemed to process this information, her expression unreadable. What is salvage? I collect valuable materials and technology from abandoned ships and stations, Kai explained, demonstrating with gestures. Things others leave behind that still have worth. Lyra's eyes narrowed. You take from the dead. I give new life to things that would be forgotten, Kai countered, unsure why her opinion suddenly mattered. Before she could respond, a distant wailing cry echoed through the forest. Lyra tensed immediately, her hand tightening on her spear. Shadow Stalker, she hissed. We must move. Now. They traveled for hours, deeper into the forest, with the light gradually changing as one of Xylos's moons rose to join the strange, muted sun. Lyra grew increasingly unsteady, the poison clearly taking its toll despite her stubborn pace. Kai found himself supporting her weight more often, impressed by her determination. There, she finally said, pointing to what appeared to be a sheer cliff face covered in the same luminescent vegetation that dominated the forest. As they approached, Kai realized the cliff was actually the exposed root system of a colossal tree, its structure creating natural terraces and hollows. Lyra led him to a narrow fissure barely visible behind a curtain of hanging vines. Inside, the passage widened into a small cave with a ceiling that glowed with patches of bioluminescent fungi, providing soft, blue-green light. The floor was lined with what appeared to be woven mats and furs, with various implements and containers arranged along the walls. Your home? Kai asked, helping Lyra settle onto one of the mats. Safe place, she corrected. One of many. Rest here until poison fades. Kai used the opportunity to properly treat her wound, applying more advanced coagulants and regeneratives from his medkit. The poison had spread, but seemed to be slowing. Lyra's natural physiology was evidently fighting back. Your technology, Lyra said suddenly, watching him adjust settings on a small medical scanner. Not like others who came before. Kai looked up sharply. Others? Other ships have crashed here. Lyra's expression darkened. Not crashed. Came. Took. Killed. She struggled with the words, then switched to gestures, miming digging and taking followed by weapons and death. Mining operations? Kai guessed. Resource extraction. They take from the living, she said, using his earlier words deliberately. Not salvage. Theft. She pointed to marks on her arm that Kai had assumed were natural patterns. 3 parallel scars, precisely spaced. Skinners, she said, practically spitting the word. They hunt my people. Take skin, take blood. Say we have value. Horror dawned on Kai. They're harvesting biological materials from sentient beings. It wasn't unheard of in the lawless outer systems. Corporations or criminal organizations exploiting indigenous populations for unique biological compounds or genetic material. The practice was illegal under Galactic Compact law, but enforcement was sparse this far from central systems. Your people, they're more like you? Where are they? Lyra's expression grew guarded. Hidden. Safe place, far from here. She studied him intently. You are not like Skinners. No, Kai said firmly. What they're doing is wrong. Criminal, where I come from. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. Sleep now. Talk more when light returns. Despite his exhaustion, Kai found sleep elusive. He took inventory of his supplies, checked Lyra's condition as she slept fitfully, and contemplated a situation. If there were illegal harvesting operations on Xylos, that complicated things significantly. He needed to repair his communications array, not just to save himself now, but to alert the Galactic Compact authorities. Morning, if the subtle brightening of the ambient light could be called that, brought new clarity. Lyra's fever had broken during the night, and though still weak, she moved with more of her natural grace. The wound looked better, the spreading toxin contained by some combination of Kai's treatments and her own biology. They share a meal of ration bars from Kai's pack and some kind of fibrous fruit Lyra produced from a hidden cache. The taste was surprisingly pleasant, tangy with notes of citrus and something like cinnamon. I need to return to my ship, Kai explained as they ate. Salvage what I can, especially communications equipment. Dangerous, Lyra said. Your crash site. Noticed. Skinners patrol edges of territory. They will investigate. All the more reason to go quickly, Kai argued. If they get to my ship first, any chance of sending a distress signal is gone. Lyra considered this, then nodded. I will guide. No paths Skinners do not. They set out after securing the cave entrance. Lyra moved differently today, still guarded around Kai, but with a growing sense of partnership. She showed him how to walk silently on the forest floor, how to identify the subtle signs of disturbed vegetation that might indicate recent passage. Why do you help me? Kai asked as they paused by a stream to refill his water containers. Yesterday you were ready to skewer me. Lyra's tail flicked in what Kai was beginning to recognize as amusement. You helped when poisoned. Honor debt. She paused, searching for words. Also, you have weapons. Technology. Might help against Skinners. Pragmatic, Kai observed with a slight smile. Survival, she replied, pronouncing the word carefully. Their journey took them through increasingly strange terrain. They skirted a grove where the trees leaked a viscous amber fluid that Lyra indicated was highly acidic. They passed clusters of massive fungi that released clouds of spores when shadows crossed their surface. At one point, they entered a region where Kai felt inexplicably lighter, as though gravity itself fluctuated. Xylos is unusual, he commented as they navigated a field of floating rock formations. Alive, Lyra corrected. Xylos breathes. Changes. Those who listen survive. By midday, they encountered their first real danger. Lyra froze suddenly, raising a hand in warning. Ahead, barely visible through the dense vegetation, moved large bipedal figures in sealed environmental suits. Even at this distance, Kai could make out the industrial-grade cutting tools and collection canisters they carried, standard mining equipment repurposed for something far darker. Skinners, Lyra whispered, her body tensing like a coiled spring. 3. Armed. Kai studied them through a small scope from his pack. The suits bore no corporate insignia, but the equipment was definitely high-end. Mercenaries, most likely working for whoever was running the illegal operation. They're heading toward the crash site, he muttered. We need to go around them. Lyra shook her head. No time. Must move faster. She pointed to a dense canopy of interlocking branches above. Up. Move through trees. Kai had a height dubiously. I'm not exactly built for climbing like you are. In response, Lyra produced a coiled length of what appeared to be braided vine from her waist pouch. Strong enough. I guyed. The next hour was a harrowing exercise in trust as Kai followed Lyra through the upper reaches of the forest canopy. What would have been impossible alone became merely terrifying with her guidance. She seemed to know instinctively which branches would hold weight and which would snap, creating natural bridges and handholds where none seemed to exist. When they finally descended to the forest floor again, the crash site lay just ahead, and it was immediately clear they weren't the first to arrive. The area around the nomads swarmed with activity. More of the suited figures, Kai counted at least 7, were systematically stripping the ship of useful components and scanning the surrounding area. Too late, Lyra murmured. Maybe not, Kai replied, studying the scene. They haven't breached the secure storage compartment yet. See that sealed panel they're working on? My backup communication module is in there, along with some more valuable equipment. Too many, Lyra countered pragmatically. We attack, we die. We don't attack, Kai said. We distract. Using materials from the forest and some components from Kai's pack, they cobbled together a series of small devices that combined chemical reactions from Kai's emergency flares with volatile compounds Lyra harvested from certain plants. The result was crude but effective, devices that would create loud noises and bright flashes when triggered remotely. They planted these devices in a wide perimeter. Then Kai activated the first one on the opposite side of the clearing from where they planned to approach the ship. The resulting explosion was more spectacular than anticipated. A brilliant purple flare that shot 20 meters into the air accompanied by a concussive blast that knocked down smaller vegetation. The reaction was immediate. Most of the skinners grabbed weapons and moved toward the disturbance, while 2 remained to guard the ship. Kai triggered a second device, then a third, creating the impression of a coordinated attack from multiple directions. Now, he whispered, and they sprinted toward the ship's underside, where a maintenance hatch provided access to the lower compartments. The remaining guards never saw them coming. Lyra moved with lethal efficiency, her spear finding a gap in one guard's environmental suit before he could raise the alarm. Kai tackled the second, using his mechanical knowledge to target the suit's external breathing apparatus, rendering the occupant unconscious within seconds. Inside the ship, they moved quickly through the darkened corridors. The Skinners had already stripped most of the accessible technology, but the secure compartment remained sealed. They'd been working on bypassing its security protocols when the distractions drew them away. Kai punched in his override code, and the compartment hissed open. Inside were his most valuable salvage tools, the backup communication module, and several weapons more substantial than his service pistol. Take everything you can carry, he instructed Lyra, who efficiently loaded components into a makeshift sling fashioned from material in the ship. Kai grabbed the communication module and a compact energy rifle, along with power cells and additional medical supplies. They were halfway out when the alarms began. Shouts echoed through the ship as the Skinners realized they'd been duped. Time to go, Kai said grimly, leading the way to an emergency exit hatch that would deposit them on the far side of the ship from where they'd entered. They burst from the hatch into chaos. The distraction devices had done more than expected. They had attracted local wildlife. A massive creature that Kai could only describe as a cross between a centipede and a panther was wreaking havoc among the Skinners, its multiple limbs ending in razor-sharp appendages that sliced through environmental suits with terrifying ease. Shadow Stalker, Lyra breathed, a note of reverent fear in her voice. Run. Now. They didn't need to be told twice. Using the confusion, they slipped back into the dense forest, the sounds of combat fading behind them. They didn't stop running until they'd put several kilometers between themselves and the crash site, finally pausing in a small clearing dominated by a pool of still, dark water. That, Kai panted, was closer than I'd like. Lyra made a sound that might have been a laugh. You attract danger, Starman, says the woman who had a poisonous thorn in her shoulder yesterday. Kai retorted, but he was smiling. Something had shifted between them, a trust born of shared danger. They took inventory of their salvaged equipment. The communication module was intact, but would need a power source and some minor repairs. More concerning were the items Kai had discovered in the secure compartment. Data crystals containing information about an abandoned research outpost several days' journey to the north. This might be where the Skinners are operating from, he explained to Lyra, showing her the rough map displayed by a scanner. It was supposed to be a scientific research station, abandoned decades ago during a corporate restructuring. Perfect cover for an illegal harvesting operation. Lyra studied the map, her expression darkening. Know this place. Forbidden territory. Many of my people taken there. None return. If I can get this communication module working, Kai said, I can send a distress signal with information about the illegal operation. The Galactic Compact would send investigators. They take biological harvesting very seriously. How long? Lyra asked. To repair it? A day, maybe two. For help to arrive? Weeks, possibly months. Kai ran a hand through his hair in frustration. We're very far from established routes. Lyra was silent for a long moment. My people cannot wait months, she finally said. Skinners take more each cycle. Soon, none left. The implications hung heavy between them. Waiting for official help wasn't an option. But what could the two of them do against an entrenched operation with superior numbers and technology? As night fell, they made camp near the pool, taking turns keeping watch. During his shift, Kai worked on the communication module by the light of bioluminescent fungi Lyra had collected. The technology was salvageable, but would need a significant power source, more than his portable cells could provide. When Lyra woke for her watch, she found Kai still working, frustration evident in his posture. Problem? She asked, settling beside him. Power, he replied. The module needs more than I have. Without it, we can't send a signal strong enough to reach beyond this system. Lyra was quiet for a moment, then said, I know place. Great power. Ancient place. My people's sacred ground. Kai looked up, interest peaked. What kind of power? Old machines. From before time. Still glow, still hum. She made gestures suggesting energy and machinery. Forbidden to enter, but desperate times. How far? 2 days' journey. Deep territory. Dangerous. Kai weighed their options. Attempting to infiltrate the Skinner base directly would be suicide. Waiting for help that might never come was unacceptable. This mysterious power source might be their only hope. Can you take me there? He asked. Lyra's slitted eyes reflected the ambient light. Yes, but sacred laws broken cannot be unmade. Price to pay. You'd risk that for your people? For survival, she corrected, but something in her tone suggested there was more to her decision. They set out at first light, traveling deeper into Xylos's wilderness than Kai had ever imagined going. The forest grew denser, the flora more bizarre and beautiful. Massive flowers that tracked their movement with bulbous centers. Crystalline formations that grew from living wood. Floating spores that illuminated the air like fireflies. Lyra moved with increasing confidence as they entered what she called her people's true territory. She showed Kai how to harvest water from specialized plants and which fungi provided the most energy when consumed. In return, Kai shared his knowledge of the wider galaxy, describing worlds and species Lyra had never imagined. The stars hold many lives? She asked one evening as they rested in a natural hollow formed by the roots of a massive tree. More than anyone can count, Kai confirmed. Thousands of species across millions of worlds. And all different? Like you and I. Some more, some less. The galaxy is full of diversity. Lyra considered this, her tail swaying thoughtfully. Yet Skinners see my people as things, not lives. Kai's expression darkened. There are always those who value profit over life. The Compact tries to prevent it, but the galaxy is vast, and greed is persistent. And you? Lyra asked, her amber eyes studying him intently. What do you value, Kai? The question caught him off guard. Freedom, mostly, he answered after a moment. It's why I became a salvager. No corporate masters, no bureaucracy. Just me, my ship, and open space. He paused, realizing how that dream had shattered with the nomad. Though I suppose that's changed now. Change how? Kai gestured to the forest around them. Well, I'm stranded on an unexplored planet with illegal harvesters hunting us and my ship in pieces. Not exactly the freedom I signed up for. Yet you help me. Risk yourself for my people. Why? It was a fair question, and one Kai had been avoiding asking himself. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. And because... He hesitated, uncertain how to articulate the connection that had formed between them. Because you're not just some alien to me anymore. You're Lyra. Something shifted in her expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight tilt of her head. You are not just Starman anymore, she replied softly. You are Kai. The moment hung between them, fragile and significant. Then Lyra stood abruptly, her posture alert. We should rest. Tomorrow, difficult terrain. She wasn't exaggerating. The third day of their journey brought them to the edge of what appeared to be a massive impact crater, its edges softened by centuries of growth but still clearly defined. The crater floor hundreds of meters below was a riot of color. Plants unlike any they'd seen before, growing in concentric rings around a central structure that gleamed with an unnatural metallic sheen despite being clearly ancient. The sacred place, Lyra said, her voice hushed. The heart of Sci-Fi. That's not natural, Kai observed, using his scope to study the structure. That's a constructed facility and old, pre-compact by the look of it. The before time, Lyra agreed. When the stars fell to Xylos. The descent into the crater took hours, navigating treacherous slopes and patches of unstable ground. The plant life grew increasingly strange, species Lyra herself had never seen, with properties that defied explanation. Floating tendrils that reached for them as they passed. Flowers that emitted tones like musical instruments when touched. Pools of liquid that shifted color in response to sound. As they approached the central structure, Kai's scanner began registering energy readings far beyond anything he'd expected. Whatever power source is in there, he said, it's still active and powerful. The structure itself defied easy description. It appeared to be a combination of technology and organic growth, as though the building had been partially absorbed by Xylos itself over centuries. Metallic archways curved into living wood. Crystalline windows pulsed with the same bioluminescence as the surrounding plants. What might have once been landing pads were now elevated gardens of impossible vegetation. My people say this is where life began on Xylos, Lyra explained as they approached a massive doorway partially reclaimed by roots and vines. The Sci-Fi came, and from it, all things grew. It looks like a research station, Kai said, examining the architecture. Or maybe a terraforming hub. Early colonization technology, sometimes merged with local ecosystems intentionally. They entered cautiously, Lyra visibly tense at violating her people's taboo. Inside, the merger of technology and nature was even more pronounced. Corridors formed by both constructed walls and living matter wound through the structure. Light came from both artificial fixtures, somehow still functioning, and bioluminescent growth. Kai's scanner led them deeper, following the energy signature to what had once been a central chamber. Here, the technology was more pronounced and better preserved. Consoles lined the walls, their surfaces dark but intact. At the center stood a pillar of what appeared to be crystal or glass, pulsing with blue-green energy that cast shifting patterns across the room. The heart, Lyra whispered. Kai approached one of the consoles, brushing away years of accumulated organic matter. To his surprise, it responded to his touch, illuminating with symbols in a language he didn't recognize. This technology is incredibly advanced, he murmured, working to understand the interface. And it's been maintaining itself somehow for centuries at least. As he worked, Lyra explored the chamber, studying carved or grown patterns that seemed to tell a story. Figures from space meeting indigenous life, a merging of knowledge and biology, and what appeared to be a catastrophe, followed by regrowth. I think I understand, Kai said eventually. This wasn't just a research station. It was a seed ship, an early colonization vessel designed to merge with the planet's ecosystem and guide its development. He gestured to the central pillar. That's its core, a self-sustaining energy source meant to power the integration process for however long it took. Can it power your communicator? Lyra asked practically. More than enough. The question is how to interface safely without disrupting whatever processes are still running. Kai studied the connections. I think I can rig a temporary coupling that will draw only what we need. It took hours of careful work, with Lyra assisting as Kai talked her through the process. They created a makeshift adapter using components from Kai's salvage and materials from the station itself, which seemed to respond organically to their efforts, almost as if helping them. By the time they finished, the communication module was connected to the core's energy matrix, glowing with power beyond anything Kai's portable cells could have provided. Now we can send our message, Kai said, programming the distress signal to include detailed information about the Skinner's operation and coordinates. This signal will reach the nearest compact outpost within days. They'll dispatch investigators immediately for a biological harvesting violation. Days until signal reaches. Weeks until help arrives, Lyra reminded him. My people hunted in meantime. Kai nodded grimly, which is why we need a more immediate solution. He hesitated, then said, while I was working on the interface, I found something in the station's archived data. This facility has defensive systems, dormant but possibly functional. Lyra's eyes widened. Weapons. Environmental control systems, primarily. The station was designed to protect the ecosystem it was nurturing. The Skinner's base is built on top of an outpost connected to this hub. If we can reactivate the defensive protocols and target them specifically at the Skinner's location. We strike from here, Lyra finished, understanding dawning. But risk to forest? To my people? That's the challenge, Kai admitted. We need to modify the protocols to target only the Skinner's operation without disrupting the broader ecosystem. It would require precise calibration. Lyra circled the central pillar, her tail swaying in thought. My people speak of the heart's power. Say it protects, not destroys. Listens to Xylos. That aligns with what I'm seeing in these systems, Kai agreed, studying the console displays. The technology is designed to work in harmony with the planet, not against it. That might be our advantage. They spent the night in the ancient facility, Kai working to understand its systems while Lyra kept watch and assisted. The deeper Kai delved into the station's archives, the more fascinating the story became. The seed ship had arrived millennia ago, tasked with nurturing specific evolutionary paths on Xylos. Lyra's people, he discovered, were not native to the planet, but the result of careful genetic engineering, an attempt to create a sentient species perfectly adapted to Xylos's unique environment. Your ancestors might have come from the stars, Kai told Lyra as they shared a meal of synthesized protein and local fruits. The station records suggest deliberate genetic modification over generations. Lyra absorbed this information with surprising calm. Stars returning to stars, she said cryptically. The old songs speak of this. Ancestors from Sci-Fi. By morning, Kai had formulated a plan. Using the station's still functional systems, they could trigger a targeted ecological response around the Skinner's base, essentially turning the environment itself against the invaders without harming the broader ecosystem. The station can activate dormant defense mechanisms in the plants surrounding their facility, he explained. Heightened toxin production, accelerated growth patterns, specific pheromone releases to attract predator species. We can essentially make their position untenable without firing a single shot. And my people? Those captured? Lyra's concern was evident. The systems can identify genetic markers, Kai said. If your people are descendants of the original engineer population, the defensive responses will recognize and avoid harming them. It was a gamble, but with the Skinners continuing their harvesting operations, they had little choice. Kai sent the distress signal, then began programming the ancient systems for their ecological counterstrike. As the final algorithms initialized, a perimeter alarm Kai had rigged suddenly blared to life. His scanner showed multiple signatures approaching the crater rim. "We've been tracked," he said grimly. "The Skinners must have detected our power usage." Lyra moved to a position where she could see the crater's edge. Many, armed, coming down. The timing couldn't have been worse. The ecological defenses needed hours to fully activate around the Skinners' main base. If they were captured or killed now, the plan would fail, and Lyra's people would have no protection until the compact authorities eventually arrived, if they arrived at all. "We need to delay them," Kai said, gathering his equipment. "Keep them from reaching the facility until the protocols are fully implemented." "Fight?" Lyra asked, readying her spear. "Distract," Kai corrected. "Like at the ship, but bigger. The crater itself can help us." Using the station's systems, Kai triggered localized environmental responses along the intruder's path. Nothing as comprehensive as their main plan, but enough to slow a force unfamiliar with Xylos's full dangers. Vines grew with unnatural speed across pathways. Spore-releasing fungi activated as the Skinners passed. Pools of bioluminescent liquid became temporarily acidic. Lyra added her knowledge of the terrain, suggesting optimal locations for Kai's impromptu traps and leading him to defensible positions as they left the facility to engage in their deadly game of cat and mouse. For hours, they led the Skinners on a frustrating chase through the crater's strange ecosystem, separating their force, depleting their resources, and wearing down their resolve. Kai's scavenged energy rifle provided covering fire when necessary, while Lyra's intimate knowledge of how to move through Xylos's wilderness made her nearly impossible to track. But the Skinners were well-equipped and determined. Eventually, one group managed to flank their position, forcing them into a desperate retreat toward a stand of crystal-like trees that offered minimal cover. The first energy blast caught Kai in the side as they ran, burning through his jacket and searing the flesh beneath. He stumbled, but kept moving, Lyra pulling him forward with surprising strength. "Behind those formations," she directed, pointing to a cluster of rock-like growths ahead. They had barely reached cover when the Skinners opened fire in earnest, energy weapons scorching the vegetation around them. Kai returned fire sparingly, conserving his weapon's charge while blood soaked his shirt from a wound. "Situation suboptimal," he grunted, applying pressure to his side. Lyra tore strips from her own clothing to bind his wound. "Not die here," she instructed firmly. "Not finished yet." The determination in her eyes gave Kai strength. She was right. They had come too far to fail now. The station's protocols needed just a little more time. As if in answer to their desperate need, the ground beneath them trembled. At first, Kai thought it was weakness from his injury, but Lyra felt it too, her head tilting in recognition. "Xylos speaks," she whispered. The trembling intensified, and from the forest floor erupted massive roots and vines, moving with unnatural purpose. They lashed toward the advancing Skinners, wrapping around environmental suits and equipment with crushing force. The forest itself seemed to have awakened, responding to some signal neither Kai nor Lyra had triggered directly. The station, Kai realized, it's not just following our protocols, it's adapting them, expanding them to protect us specifically. Lyra nodded in understanding. Heart recognizes blood. She touched her healed shoulder where Kai had removed the thorn. "Your medicine in my blood of ancestors." Station protect zone. Taking advantage of the chaos, they retreated deeper into the crater, circling back toward the facility. The Skinners fought against the animated vegetation with cutting tools and weapons, but they were losing ground rapidly as more of the ecosystem turned against them. By the time Kai and Lyra reached the ancient structure, the station's central pillar was pulsing with intense energy, the patterns shifting more rapidly than before. The console displays showed cascading activations spreading outward from their location, and more significantly, massive ecological disruptions beginning around the Skinners' main base kilometers away. "It's working," Kai said, checking the readings. The main facility is being overwhelmed by similar responses, but on a much larger scale. Their environmental countermeasures can't keep up. Through the station's monitoring systems, They watched as the Skinner's operation collapsed over the next several hours. The structures were engulfed by rapidly growing vegetation. Defense perimeters failed as the very sensors they relied on were corrupted by specialized spores. Evacuation vessels were immobilized by crystalline growths that formed across their hulls. More importantly, the station was systematically identifying and protecting any life forms that matched the genetic profile of Lyra's people. Holding areas where captives had been kept were specifically bypassed by the hostile vegetation, creating safe passages for escape. "Your people," Kai said, pointing to groups of figures moving away from the compromised base. "They're getting out." Lyra watched the monitors with fierce satisfaction. Heart keeps its children, but their victory came with a price. Kai's wound, though temporarily bandaged, had been more severe than he initially admitted. The prolonged exertion and stress had taken their toll, and as the adrenaline of battle faded, he found himself struggling to remain upright. Lyra noticed immediately, supporting him as he sagged against the console. "Kai, you bleed still. Just need to rest," he managed, though they both knew it was more serious. The Skinner's weapon had caused internal damage that Kai's portable medical supplies weren't equipped to handle. Lyra guided him to a cleared area where they had set up a makeshift camp within the facility. With gentle determination, she removed his blood-soaked bandages and examined the wound. "Bad," she stated simply. "Beyond my knowledge." "Medical kit," Kai directed weakly. "The blue injector. It can stabilize until help arrives." If help arrives, he didn't say, but the thought hung between them. Lyra administered the treatment as Kai instructed, her hand surprisingly gentle for a predator species. The pain receded somewhat, but Kai knew the injector was merely buying time, not solving the underlying damage. As night fell across Xylos, they remained in the ancient heart of the station, the soft pulse of the central pillar providing rhythmic illumination. Outside, the forest continued its coordinated assault on any remaining Skinner presence, guided by protocols now fully implemented and self-sustaining. Distress signal, Kai remembered suddenly. Check. If receiving acknowledgement. Lyra retrieved the communication module and brought it to him. The small screen displayed exactly what they'd hoped for. Confirmation that the signal had been received by a compact outpost. Help was indeed coming, but the estimated arrival time was still nearly 2 weeks away. 2 weeks Kai might not have. Lyra seemed to understand the gravity of the situation without being told. She sat beside him, closer than she'd ever voluntarily positioned herself before. "You saved my people," she said quietly. "We did," Kai corrected. "Couldn't have done it without you." They sat in companionable silence for a time, listening to the strange sounds of Xylos at night filtering through the ancient structure. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice carrying an unusual hesitancy. "What happens after? When Star People come?" It was a question Kai had been avoiding himself. "They'll investigate the illegal harvesting operation, document evidence, probably establish some kind of monitoring presence to make sure it doesn't happen again. Your people will be protected under compact law. And you? When healed." The future stretched before Kai, suddenly uncertain. The nomad was destroyed. His life as a solitary salvager seemed distant now, almost like someone else's memory. "I don't know," he admitted. "Request a new ship, maybe. Or," he hesitated, looking at Lyra, "I could stay. Help establish proper first contact protocols between your people and the compact. Make sure no one exploits Xylos again." Lyra's tail swayed thoughtfully. "Stay on Xylos." It wasn't a question, but there was a weight to the words. "If that would be welcome," Kai said carefully. "Or," Lyra said after a pause, her amber eyes fixed on his, "I go with you. To stars." The suggestion startled Kai, though perhaps it shouldn't have. After everything they'd experienced together, the connection between them had grown into something neither had anticipated. "The galaxy can be harsh," he warned. "Different. Overwhelming." "Xylos harsh too," she countered. "Different good. Learn new. See stars of ancestors." She moved closer, her hand finding his. "With you. Partner." The word carried meanings beyond its simple syllables. Trust, respect, perhaps something more that neither was ready to name. Before Kai could respond, a sharp tremor ran through the facility, different from the controlled ecological responses they'd witnessed before. The central pillar's rhythm faltered momentarily, its glow intensifying then dimming. "Something's wrong," Kai said, struggling to sit up despite the pain. "The system is destabilizing." The console displays flickered with warning indicators. The ancient technology, dormant for so long and suddenly pushed to its limits by their defensive protocols, was beginning to fail. Power surges cascaded through subsystems. Environmental responses grew erratic. The very structure of the facility groaned as organic components reacted to the fluctuations. "We need to leave," Kai realized. "The whole system is going critical." But evacuation wouldn't be simple. Kai could barely walk, and the path back up the crater rim would be challenging even for someone at full strength. Moreover, the ecological defenses they'd activated were now operating unpredictably. The forest outside had become a churning sea of hyperactive growth and transformation. Lyra assessed the situation with a hunter's pragmatism. "Cannot climb. Need shelter." She scanned the facility maps, still visible on one functioning display. "There. Deep rooms. Protected." She pointed to a section of the facility designed as emergency shelters, likely built to withstand the initial terraforming processes when the seed ship first landed. If they could reach it before the systems completely failed, they might survive whatever was coming. With Lyra supporting much of his weight, Kai staggered through increasingly unstable corridors. Around them, the merger of technology and biology that had existed in harmony for millennia was coming undone. Living walls pulsed with erratic energy. Lighting systems flared and died. The very air seemed charged with potential. They reached the shelter just as the first major system collapsed. A shock wave of energy rippled through the facility, sending them sprawling through the reinforced doorway. Lyra recovered quickly, dragging Kai fully inside before slapping the emergency seal control. The door slid shut with a reassuring thunk of ancient but reliable engineering, muffling the sounds of destruction outside. The shelter was small but comprehensive, clearly designed for long-term emergency occupation. Self-contained environmental systems hummed to life as they entered, lighting adjusted to a comfortable level. Simple but functional furnishings emerged from recessed compartments in the walls. "Safe, for now," Kai managed as Lyra helped him to what appeared to be a medical berth. The shelter included basic medical equipment, nothing as advanced as a full regeneration chamber, but significantly better than Kai's portable kit. Lyra helped him connect to the diagnostic system, which immediately began assessing his injury and administering appropriate treatments. "We'll heal you," she asked anxiously. "Stabilize, at least," Kai confirmed as pain-relieving medication entered his system. "Enough until rescue arrives." Outside, they could hear the ancient facility continuing its catastrophic breakdown, the sounds muffled but still ominous. The shelter's monitoring systems showed cascading failures throughout the structure and increasingly chaotic environmental responses across the crater. "The heart dies," Lyra said solemnly. "Not dying," Kai corrected, watching the data feeds. "Transforming." "Look," the displays showed that as the original systems failed, the energy and biological materials weren't simply being destroyed. They were reconfiguring into new patterns, spreading throughout the crater and beyond in ways the station's builders likely never anticipated. The seed ship's final protocol, Kai realized, when its primary mission is complete or becomes unsustainable, it dissolves into the ecosystem, becoming fully integrated rather than remaining a separate entity. Becoming one with Xylos, Lyra translated in her own terms. They watched the transformation unfold over the next several hours, safe within their shelter as outside. Millennia of guided evolution reached its culmination. The crater became the epicenter of a new phase in Xylos' development, one where the technology that had shaped it was no longer a guiding force, but a fully integrated component of its natural processes. Days passed in the shelter, with Kai gradually recovering under the medical system's care and Lyra, venturing out briefly as conditions stabilized to scout their surroundings and gather supplies. The facility as they had known it no longer existed. In its place was a living structure that seemed to be part traditional plant life, part technological composite, all functioning in seamless harmony. When Kai was finally strong enough to leave the shelter, they emerged into a transformed world. The crater had become a garden of impossible beauty. Species that had previously existed separately now grew in precisely balanced symbiosis. Energy patterns visible as subtle illumination flowed through everything like a circulatory system. The very air seemed to respond to their presence, adjusting temperature and composition for optimal comfort. It recognized us as part of its programming. Kai observed as plants shifted to create natural pathways before them. Were incorporated into its new paradigm. At the crater's center, where the station's core had been, now stood a living tower of intertwined vegetation and crystalline structures, pulsing with the same rhythm as the original pillar, but dispersed throughout rather than centralized. Heart still beats, Lyra said. Different form. Their shelter, they discovered, remained functional, an island of traditional technology in a sea of transformation. More importantly, the communication module continued operating, maintaining contact with the approaching compact rescue mission. 6 days until arrival, Kai noted, checking the latest update. They're sending a fully equipped exploration vessel with medical facilities, scientific teams, and compact peacekeepers to investigate the harvesting operation. 6 days, Lyra repeated, looking out at the transformed crater. Decision time grows close. The question that had been interrupted by the facility's collapse still hung between them. What came next? For Kai, whose entire life had been defined by solitary wandering. For Lyra, who had never known any home but Xylos. They spent those days exploring the transformed crater, discovering its new wonders and capabilities. Through some mechanism neither fully understood, Lyra found she could communicate with the integrated systems more effectively than Kai, perhaps due to her genetic connection to the original engineer population. It responds to intention, she explained, demonstrating how plants and energy flows would reconfigure based on her focused thoughts. Listens to blood memory. With Lyra's guidance, they established contact with her scattered people, using the crater's new capabilities to send signals that only those with the right genetic markers could perceive. Survivors from the Skinner's facility made their way to the crater, along with others from hidden settlements across silos. A temporary community formed around the transformed heart, with Lyra and Kai at its center, bridge builders between different worlds. Kai shared his knowledge of the galaxy beyond. Lyra and her people shared their intimate understanding of Xylos. Together, they began preparing for the arrival of the compact vessel and the changes it would inevitably bring. On the evening of the 5th day, with rescue less than 24 hours away, Kai and Lyra sat atop a viewing platform that had formed naturally from the living structure, watching Xylos' strange sunset paint the sky in colors that defied easy description. "Your wound heals well," Lyra noted, gesturing to Kai's side where the energy weapon had struck. "Good as new almost," he agreed. "Your people's knowledge of local medicinal plants helped more than the shelter's technology in the end." "Balance," Lyra said with satisfaction. "Technology and nature. Like new heart." A comfortable silence fell between them, but beneath it lay the unresolved question of their futures. Finally, Kai turned to face her directly. "I've been thinking about what you said. Before everything changed." Lyra's tail swayed gently, her amber eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. "About stars. About partnership," Kai clarified. "About choices." He took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. "The compact will establish a permanent presence here. Scientific, diplomatic, protective. They'll need people who understand both worlds. People who can ensure Xylos and its people are respected, not exploited." "You offer to stay," Lyra observed. "Or to go," Kai continued. "The compact would value your knowledge elsewhere, too. There are other worlds with similar challenges, other indigenous populations needing advocates who understand both sides." "Both valid paths," Lyra said thoughtfully. "But which true path?" "That's just it. Kai said with a small smile. I don't think there's a single true path anymore. Not for me, anyway. He gestured to the transformed landscape around them. Xylos has taught me something about adaptation, about integration of seemingly opposing elements. Understanding dawned in Lyra's expression. Not choose between worlds. Bridge worlds. Exactly. We could base ourselves here, helping establish proper relations between Xylos and the Compact. But we could also travel when needed, advocating for your people in Compact councils, or helping other worlds facing similar challenges. Lyra repeated, the word carrying weight. If that's what you want, Kai said softly. I've spent my life running from connections, salvaging abandoned things instead of building new ones. I'd like to try something different. With you. Lyra moved closer, her natural grace making the motion seem like flowing water. She placed a hand against his chest, over his heart. Partners, she said simply. In both worlds. As the last light faded from Xylos's strange sky, they remained together on the platform, planning a future neither could have imagined when a damaged ship fell from the stars and a poisoned thorn created the first tenuous bond between them. Morning brought the distinctive rumble of approaching spacecraft. The compact vessel descended through Xylos's atmosphere with considerably more grace than Kai's crash landing, settling at the crater's edge where a natural landing pad had conveniently formed overnight. Another example of the transformed heart's responsive capabilities. Kai and Lyra stood together at the head of her gathered people, watching as the ship's ramp extended and the first compact representatives emerged. The officials paused momentarily, clearly taken aback by the sight that greeted them. Not the expected rescue of a stranded salvager, but a thriving community centered around a biological technological marvel unlike anything in recorded compact history. Ready? Kai asked, glancing at Lyra. She straightened to her full height, tail swaying with confidence, and gave him the feline smile he'd come to treasure. Ready, partner. Together, they stepped forward to greet the stars.